Welcome back to Performance Lab. Today I'm sharing my conversation from the Wayfinder Show, a podcast by my good friend Louis Hernandez. And we covered a lot in this conversation. We talked about balancing multiple passions, the art of coaching, the future of performance science, and wrapped up discussing mindful living. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did having it. Let's dive in.
Before we get into it, I always like to share, with our audience, have you share a little bit about yourself. What's your origin story? How'd you get here?
Sure. I think whenever I talk about how I got to where I am, I have to first give a shout out to my parents who were amazing. And my mother really lived a balanced lifestyle. She was a social worker. My father was a minister. And having a 2-year-old son now, I appreciate how much, as a parent to myself, what my parents modeled for me, and we forget what our parents told us, but we internalize the things they model for us. And even though both of my parents worked a lot, also, particularly my mother, modeled living a full life of things that they enjoyed and spending time with me and my brother growing up and taking us to museums and reading and cooking really delicious homemade meals and going out for bike rides. And just that's so much of who I am to anyone who knows me, a balance of a variety of things. Sometimes people say if you're not fully focused, on one thing, those other things are distractions and they'll detract from the thing that you're really going after. I think most high achievers I know are high achieving in a variety of areas, not 10 different areas or a dozen different areas, but like 2 or 3, and Louis, you have running in addition to real estate, in addition to the podcast and these kinds of things, right? And those things fill your cup. And if you're drained in one area or you're not being as successful in one area, you have other things to lean on, and so my mother just modeled that from as far back as I can remember. And she was my best friend and my confidant and many other things besides just my mother. Unfortunately, we lost her about a decade ago, but she lives on within me, and I'm happy on all, days like yesterday, celebrations to remember her. It was Memorial Day, and we sometimes just memorialize the people who gave their life for this country, but there were a lot of other people who it's important to remember. So I gave a shout out on social media to my grandparents and also has some special moments myself to memorialize my mother as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. She sounded like an amazing woman. I'm sorry that you lost her, but it sounds like you've done a good job of memorializing her. And I know you, and you're a pretty special person. You're a really high achiever, so it's clear that she must have been unbelievable. I am curious. You brought up something interesting there about just you work with a lot of high achievers, and you're a very high achiever. And you talked about working in different areas. And like you mentioned with me, with running and podcasting and real estate, one of the internal conflicts I have sometimes with that is I feel like I don't focus enough in one area. When I do really well, right? Like I'll run a really fast marathon, but my business and real estate might go by the wayside, or same with podcasting or what have you. Do you find that it's a difficult struggle? Do you ever feel like that keeps us from fully achieving what we can be in something by having so many different areas to juggle?
I'm gonna start off answering that, just prefacing that I think one of the things I learned as a parent, I became a father at in my early 40s, and I used to have 8-hour blocks of time to do all the things I wanted to do in a day, unbroken, right? I would go to work and I would have these huge blocks of time, right? And then having a toddler or an infant who was sleeping for an unpredictable, unreliable 60 to 120-minute segments throughout the day. I wanted to be available when he was awake. And so I began to break my 8-hour period into hour or 2-hour blocks, and that was one of the best things that I could have done, I think, and really learn what is that bite-sized piece that I can finish in 60 to 90 minutes, because there's time to prepare mentally and even prepare your workspace for things. And then, we might think we're multitasking or able to multitask, but very, very few people can actually do multiple things well simultaneously, or the quality of the work we're doing just decreases probably across the board, right? If I was having a conversation with you, but I'm texting on my phone, like I'm not really doing either very well. And so what I've started doing just in the last, I'd say 6 months, is really focusing on finishing whatever I start in a period of time, a block that I've assigned for that task. And so what that requires, if I have 60 minutes, I have to break that down into such a bite-sized piece that at the end of that 60 minutes, I've finished it. I haven't worked on it. I've finished that thing. Or maybe it's 2 blocks. So maybe not everything can be accomplished in 60 minutes, right? But I think what leads to distraction and leads to, feeling like you're failing, you didn't use those words, but, a lot of times we feel like we're letting people down or we're letting something down by focusing on one thing versus another thing because we have lots of balls in the air, is because we're working on it, right? We're moving it just a little bit, but we never finish it. And then we're picking it back up and we're working and moving it like 2% more. But it never really gets finished. And when you think back, a lot of projects that didn't get complete, there are probably some times where you're like, yeah, I spent 3 months doing that thing and it never saw the light of day. It was strategizing or was whatever. And not everything is about productivity and deliverables. But if you don't have that mentality of finishing and putting it out there, there's the adage in academia where I came from that if you don't publish your work, you might as well have never even done the research, right? I think one of the things with high achievers that gets in the way of this, the putting it out there, right, which is often the final step, right? The delivery of that final product is perfectionism, right? That it's not quite up to our standard. And so we have shelves full, either literally or figuratively, of work we've done that never sees the light of day because it's 85% perfect, right? And then there's others out there who are putting out things we laugh at and like, that's so messy, but they put it out 7-8 times a day, right?
Yeah.
Times 7 days a week, times 52 weeks a year. And the fact of the matter is most people, they're scrolling past a lot of it, right? But they're taking in subconsciously, I'm talking about social media right now, you're getting views, right, from them, even if it's subconscious, and so I think just finishing things and putting things out there is the number one piece of advice I would have for particularly high achievers, because we tend to be perfectionists.
Yeah. I think you and I have had this discussion before, right? Where we feel that we are experts, I think, in our respective areas, right? And we've been doing the work for many years, but then you get somebody else out there on social media who's established as an expert or influencer who you can just hear saying things that just make us cringe, right? But they have become established as the experts or influencers and they get the business and what have you. And it's our own fault for not putting it out there, our information, our expertise, right? And so we only got ourselves to blame at that point. So I think you make a really good point about the deliverable is a part of, of completion or something, as you put it better than I did.
Yeah, I have a couple ebooks that I'll be releasing later this year. And I was actually just going back to look at all the resources that I've created over the last couple of years, because with my business, it's taken several pivots. And I was focused initially on cyclists and mountain bikers for a while. And then I was considering going into the hybrid athlete sort of high rocks style of training, and I'm circling back now to runners, and some of my greatest success stories with clients have been marathoners and ultra runners who were doing a lot of the right things, but with the program that I developed for them, they were actually able to lose some weight while maintaining their muscle and just really finish feeling really, really good. And I think there's a science and an art to coaching and to training, I think, as well, and the art is how you're feeling, right? And you were not feeling it earlier this year and decided not to run one of the big races you had on your schedule. And you could have, I know we talked about this, you could have done it, and you could have followed the training plan and put in the miles and put in the hours, and you could have done it, but intuitively that your body would not have felt good at the end of that race, and there might have been a detriment. And I think as we get into our middle age, we were a little bit smarter about those kinds of things, and it's about longevity and not just performance. And you're also not a sponsored athlete, right? And so you didn't have to do anything you don't want to do. But I think that's the biggest thing that I instill in the people I work with is that feeling that they feel healthy. Someone asked me just yesterday if I was going to do the Murph workout for Memorial Day, and or how many Murphs I was going to do, and I said about a decade ago I did two of them, and so the total that's 4 miles and 200 pull-ups, 400 push-ups, and 600 squats. And I was a younger man back then, and you know, it was I was able to do it, and I did no issues. But I said now I train for health, not despite health. And I think that wisdom of knowing where your limitations are. You know, I love racing, but you don't race every training session. You know, if people are wanting the best result, a lot of times it's backing off or it's doing less. And I think that's one of the unique things about my coaching philosophy is that you know, I don't want to call anybody out, but it's kind of the anti-David Goggins. You know, it's
Especially
running, yeah, it's running towards your goal, your objective, as opposed to running away from something in your past that you know is haunting you. So that's one of the big things of having a future vision of where you want to be and then aligning your training with that, as opposed to like, I don't want this, or, you know, a lot of times running is used as sort of a coping mechanism, you know, a de-stressor, and that's great. But if you really want to be a competitive runner, it needs to be, you know, fueling your body just as much as it's a release for your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it certainly started off as my drug of choice. And over time, it became, you know, an obsession and something different. But, you know, what's funny about what you're bringing up, I think about burnout. And I think I'm kind of in a burnout phase, right? Where you can become like so, and especially with endurance sports, you know, it's not just a mental burnout, which happens quite a bit, but it's obviously a physical burnout. And how do you advise dealing with that, preventing it, getting over it?
Yeah, I think you make an important distinction. I want to delineate between mental and physical burnout, because when I was giving a talk a couple months ago, I asked the audience how stressed they were. And that's, you know, the feeling of stress, the sensation of stress, how we hold it in our body is generally, it could be a reflection of both, but a lot of times it's the mental burden, right? That we're the mental burnout that we would call stress, that we would label stress, right? And a lot of the guys said they were using exercise to deal with it. And I think that's great, you know, especially compared to other modalities, even vices. I have an adage for physical burnout that there's no such thing as overtraining, just under recovering.
Yeah.
And I think that means a lot of people will say, I need to adjust my training plan. You know, I need to back off on the mileage. One of my clients asked me recently, one of his training partners has rest weeks, you know, or deload weeks built in every month, every 3 or 4 weeks. And I design programs so that you don't need to get to that point of completely backing off, especially every 3 or 4 weeks. Like that's too soon in the macro cycles that I program. And I
Wait,
think
I'm sorry, you're saying your programs don't require backing off every 3 or 4 weeks?
no,
So you
no,
keep loading?
we ramp up in a way that is a consistent load, because my programs are generally 90 days for
Sure.
most, and so we're balancing cycling. I mean, this guy was a cyclist training for the triple bypass ride, and he's doing 3 days of strength training, 3 days of running, and has a rest day every week. And so we're regulating his mileage to an extent that he doesn't have to back off on the mileage. And he just texted me yesterday and said he's feeling great. He just had a
Really?
75 mile ride, his longest ride of the training, and you know, the race is in July. So
So for 90 days
we'll
straight, you keep
continue.
loading. You continuing to load week after week.
We're keeping the load. So the duration, right there, the three elements are frequency, duration, and intensity, right, of a fitness protocol. And the frequency really isn't changing that much. Next month we'll add in one more riding day and take out a strength training day, because we're now about 6 weeks out from the ride. Generally, the duration's not going to increase too much. He loves riding, so if he wants to go out for a long ride, I'm not going to say, you know, you can't enjoy a beautiful day here in Colorado on your bike, right? But we're going to adapt the intensity if the duration increases and the frequency stays same. And so as we ramp up and ramp down a little bit, he also has a toddler daughter. And so, sleep is an issue, recovery is an issue. He has some travel, both personal and business. And so we're really kind of threading that needle of not overtraining. And again, the biggest thing, I want to just complete this thought that there's the three big components of nutrition: recovery modalities, whether it's foam rolling or sauna or cold plunge or these kind of things, and then sleep, and then stress management. And if you're not getting good sleep, or your nutrition's not dialed in, or your recovery in general, you go for a long ride, you go for a long run, and then you just sit for the next 8 hours. Let's say you go for a morning run, and then you just sit all day, whether you're in the car or you're at your desk, like not moving around. Those are where I start with before I adjust the training program, and look at, are you getting enough calories? Are you getting the right kind of calories? Is the timing of the calories good? Right. And then from a recovery standpoint, and the modality aspect, what if we add in on the way driving home? Let's say, I know you run sometimes in the morning, and you might drive somewhere to go for a long run, just using the massage gun in the car. Or when I drive pretty far to go mountain biking and or skiing, for example, in the winter, I'll sometimes put like an e-stim thing on my leg to just continue to fire those muscles just at a very, very low level, right? So that I don't tighten up, and I get home feeling a lot fresher than I did if I, driving back from Breckenridge an hour and a half or more, maybe 3 hours in the peak of winter. And then, and then sleep. It's tough when you have young kids, or, a stressful job, or those kinds of things. But that's when we recover, and consistency of sleep, especially bedtime, is really, really important, because it's that first third of sleep where you get the most deep and REM and restful sleep, restorative sleep. And so when you normally go to bed at 10 o'clock, and then you go to bed at midnight, and then you may sleep, an extra 2 hours because you went to bed 2 hours later, but you're not going to feel the same restoration from that same duration, because you've changed the time period that you were asleep, and your body's circadian rhythm is used to beginning to recover at 10. And so you've basically missed 2 hours of really, really deep restorative sleep.
You obviously use a lot of data to drive your planning, and you customize your plans for everybody based on that data, right? What
That's
are
right.
the key metrics that you look for?
So I'll just, again, step back just to see the big picture for a minute, and then I'll directly answer the metrics. But a lot of programs are personalized to some extent. But what I really like to establish with anyone, whatever their objective is, a lot of people want to run a marathon, or they want to run a faster marathon, or they want to, lose some weight, or just feel better, move better. Most people don't really know where they are right now. And a lot of professionals out there who have become more and more popular, like functional medicine physicians and things, I think more so now than particularly 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago, there are these tests that, you can take at home, and it gives you, it's usually blood test, or DNA or something, right? And it gives you a program, supplements, and these kinds of things based on your physical biomarkers, internal biomarkers, right? And that gives you a baseline. I mean, a lot of times it's a company that's trying to sell you supplements, and so they're going to tell you, where you're deficient in certain areas. But I kind of look at the external biomarkers just as much. I think that's important for people who really want to dial in something. They have deficiencies, right? But if we think of the body like a car, like we're looking kind of under the hood with that kind of test, right? Like we're looking at, what's the oil level and these kinds of things. And the testing I do, the metrics I use are performance metrics, right? So we're going to do some strength testing, some mobility testing, some conditioning testing, some fitness testing. And all of that is sport specific. So I'm going to tailor that to a runner, or a cyclist, or a CrossFitter, or a hybrid athlete, or an obstacle course racer. Different things matter. Like your grip strength, for example, the last one I mentioned was an obstacle course racer. Grip strength is really important if you're doing that, or a CrossFitter, right? But it's not as important if you're a runner. And so we're going to test these kinds of things. And I do mobility and strength and conditioning with everyone, but the exact tests that they do are a little bit different. And that establishes a baseline. And then we retest every 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks or so across the program. And we make tweaks along the way to make sure the areas where you were not as strong, not necessarily your weak areas, but the areas where you needed the most improvement are getting stronger, and not excluding the other areas. We're taking a holistic approach to make sure that the areas that were potentially going to hold you back, which is a lot of times the areas that people don't really focus on as much, like mobility, right? Unless you're doing specific mobility work, and doesn't have to take a lot of time. And I know this podcast is going to come out after this, but in June, I'm doing workshops on 4 areas that I think are the most overlooked areas, that if people incorporated just 5 or 10 minutes a day in these areas, or just like 5% improvements in these areas, they would see a huge difference. And that's core strength, strength training, mobility and recovery, and nutrition. And when you stack all of those, ignoring those is what's really holding a lot of people back. And, you don't have to, a lot of these are not about aesthetics. A lot of people are taking an aesthetic approach to it, whether it's getting a 6-pack or whether it's, lifting for, visible changes in their body, or eating so they can lose weight. But those aesthetic, the visible things that someone can actually notice, is not necessary, because we're talking about, for a lot of people, it's, if we got a 2% change in each of these areas, that might be enough to get where they want to be. It doesn't have to be a complete overhaul. And I think I say that a lot about the work that I do with clients, that we're not doing, complete overhaul. We're just tweaking. It's generally, you're already, and it's self-selecting of the type of people I work with, but they already have the habits. Generally, they have the routines, they're doing the things for years, but they're not quite getting the results that they're looking for, whether it's getting on the podium or, finishing a race and really feeling good. They finish the race, but they feel like shit, and they end up in the medical tent, or they don't finish, or they're just pushing in a way that we can bring some ease to the training, and we can bring some ease to the racing. And I still think the adage of, I always say you have to suffer during the training so that you don't suffer as much during the race.
Yes.
But it doesn't, one of the things I emphasize with, especially the cyclists I see, is, a lot of times you see people like death gripping the handlebars, and, like their jaw is clenched, and they're exerting so much energy that's not at all translating to power through the pedals. And so being able to find some ease, especially hours into a bike ride, whether it's a training session or a race, when you look at Olympic sprinters, for example, like their face is, distorted, all over the place when they're running, as fast as they can, because they've trained to not hold tension in areas that it's not helping them run faster, and so these kinds of little things are not hacks or, tricks or anything like that. It's just what the elite athletes are doing. There's no reason that amateurs and anyone can't learn from the best in the sport and the best in the world and apply the same kinds of things that they're doing.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take advantage of this moment to ask you selfishly, if I were to sign on with you right now, and my goal, is to run a sub 3-hour marathon, how would you, what kind of tests would you perform on me right now?
What kind of tests would I perform? Well, we want to know where your conditioning level is. And so I'd have you run at a few distances, or you probably have times. We could just look at your Strava over the last month or so, and look at like a 5K time, and some intervals as well. And I think that's one of the things that, unless people are really dedicated to a training plan, a lot of people run like you, often with a group, right? And it's harder like that to say, okay, we're going to run 200-meter intervals, right? Or 400s today. You go out and you run, 5K or 5 miles or 8 miles or whatever you guys run, right? But I think incorporating that anaerobic training is really important. And the reason goes back to what I was talking about before around intensity versus duration. And all miles, as you know, are not created equal. And so the intense miles have a big value in endurance training, even if you're training for a marathon or longer, you still want to do that speed work and that intense work because it stimulates your muscles in a different way where you get some intensity, but you don't have to recover in the same way you do from logging those long training sessions, right? And so that's one of the sort of components. I was going to say secrets, but it's not a secret to the training that I do with all these athletes is there's always strength built in, and there's always, and I would definitely go through the four areas that I described with you as well and see if see what your current core strength is, because if your body is not coordinated from head to toe and you're wasting a lot of effort through rotation, which is not helping you propel you forward, then tightening your core, and so for most people,
How would you test that?
you'll have to come to the first workshop and find out. No, I think well, the first thing I would do is just video you running and look, is your torso or your shoulders moving, are you twisting, are you rotating more than, is there wasted energy there?
How
And
about
just
mobility?
how would I test mobility? So I'm going to start at the bottom at the ankles for you, and then hips. We don't really need to go that much above the waist for a runner. I definitely would for a cyclist, because that hunched position doesn't allow you to breathe as well. And a lot of people, especially when they're fatigued or they're working at a desk most of their day when they're not on their bike, are really hunched over. And so shoulder mobility, scapular mobility is really important in a cyclist, because you just adopt that cyclist posture. But in runners, I'm going to focus on the lower body. So it's hip mobility and ankle mobility. The overhead squat is a great one for total mobility, but just having you do some air squats going down as low as you can go would be a great initial test that I could, just, you don't even have to change in your clothes out of your suit to do that, as long as your pants are flexible enough, and then doing things like going from a plank position to bringing your like right foot outside of your right hand, seeing, how low you are in that position, how ease that is. That's not neither of those are really a running specific sort of position. Hopefully you're not going to get into either of those positions when you're actually running, but those are great tests of that mobility of the hip. And the hip's a complex joint, just like the shoulders, that you have it going forward and back, and then also side to side, right? And so there's a lot of stabilizing muscles in the hips there. That my brother's a physical therapist, and he says there's an adage that sometimes muscles are tight because they're tight, and other times muscles are tight because they're weak. And if muscle is tight because it's tight, you want to stretch it, but if it's tight because it's weak, you want to strengthen it.
How can you tell the difference?
Well, he would be the better one to answer that. But a lot of times a lot of times with people who are seeing a physical therapy, it's by injury, right? That it's weak. Maybe it was partially torn. But I think one of the things one indication that I've found personally is if you're stretching it pretty consistently and it doesn't get looser, right? It's probably weak. And even if it's just tight, doing movement in that area is never a bad idea. So doing strengthening exercises, particularly for the stabilizers, almost everybody on the planet has weak glutes and weak gluteus minimus, medius particularly. And so, doing exercises that strengthen that, especially cyclists, especially runners. And one of the reasons, you'll find people with stronger muscles in that area when they're playing a sport that involves movement in different directions. But when you're running, generally you're running in a straight line, and when you're biking, it's a repetitive motion in a straight line. And so the muscles that are getting that repetitive, all of those thousands and thousands of repetitions, even within one training session, begin to tighten up and begin to, it's actually advantageous going in that direction. But as soon as you're required to sidestep when you're running or something like that, or you get out of the saddle and your bike's moving, you're taxing those stabilizers in a way that you haven't trained most of the time for. And so you're going to, potentially, especially if you're under fatigue, put yourself at risk of injury. And so again, that's why with everyone I work with, we assess and then usually address any issues, any problem areas in these 4 areas. And then the last is nutrition. And with that is hydration, right?
Hmm.
And, there's a lot of products out there that people use to stay hydrated, and ultimately happy muscles are hydrated muscles. And so anything that we're doing, and that's one of the reasons, again, sprint training is great, because you don't, especially when it's so hot here in Colorado, you don't have to go out and dehydrate your body, dehydrate your muscles for 2-hour, 3-hour runs if you bring that same intensity and that same stimulus in a shorter amount of time. And then it makes it easier to recover, especially again, at high altitude, at high temperatures. I'm doing a race on Saturday, a mountain bike race, and I'm beginning to hydrate today. We're on a Tuesday, and the race is on Saturday, and I'm going to be really diligent about hydration for the next 5 days to make sure, again, it's at an elevation, and it's going to be in the 80s. So I want to make sure I get ahead of that, and don't put myself in a situation, because all the training I've done and everything I do, all the nutrition and recovery is kind of goes out the window if I end up dehydrated, because
Yeah.
that really decreases performance quickly.
Yeah. All right. So, Michael, I know you're really driven by data and technology and such. I'm curious to know where you think performance sports and science is headed in the next 5-10 years, especially with all of our advancements right now with AI and such.
Yeah, I think we've already seen a huge translation of medical devices from the medical field into sport. And I'm excited about seeing more and more of that. I think we will, with more data comes the need to analyze that data. And I said a couple years ago, I think we're in the big data stage of fitness and performance, where, it was genomic data 20 plus years ago when the genome was sequenced. And at that time, they collected tons and tons of data. And then back to the beginning, they didn't finish doing anything with it, and it just stayed in repositories. And I think there's still a lot of data even now that's collected and kind of wasted because we're not able to make it actionable. And so we might look at our sleep score, right, and look at our intensity of our workouts and how much we're supposed to recover, but there's so much other data that could easily be collected. And then it's the kind of 1+1=3 when we combine these different things. And I know guys who wear 3 or 4 devices, between themselves and on their bike and whatnot. And I don't think that's necessary for most people. But I think when we were talking about nutrition and hydration and things like that, I think what would be really interesting to me is if there were more high level athletes that really want to dial in. Let's say they're doing marathons or ultra marathons or bike races that are 5 or 6 hours or more, or triathlons and these kinds of things, right? Not 5Ks or really fast, half marathons or 10 miles or something like that, but these longer duration, and really dial in nutrition using continuous glucose monitors and other devices that are measuring what's really going on in your body when you're consuming food while you're training. Right. And I know some people who only consume like goo packets, or something like that, gels during a race. And maybe that's working for them. But what if we mixed up, the hydration? You can put it especially for cyclists, you can put a lot of calories in a water bottle.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
And so, most people don't want to, especially at that intensity that these elite level athletes are racing, they don't want to be eating solid foods. But what if we played with composition of nutrition and timing, and and the other thing, and then see real time, what is that doing, right? And then after, how is the recovery, right? And dial that in so that they know and they can get an alert, right, while they're racing, based on all the data, right? The AI is analyzing all of this training data based on this window of 5 minutes, because maybe you're going down a big hill on a bike and you can't exactly at that moment drink your water bottle or whatever, right? But within this 5-minute window, you need to take in, 3 chugs of your water bottle, because if you miss that window, we know later in the race you don't perform as well.
And I think we can take this to the next level. And that's just an example with nutrition, right? But I think we're going to have data that probably the Olympic level athletes are going to be doing. But again, I think a lot of the tactics and strategies and techniques that these Olympic level and elite level athletes are doing can be translated. But the caveat to that, and I'll get off my soapbox with it after this, a lot of the things that they're doing when you're running, let's say a 2:30 marathon or faster, right, is not relevant if you're running a 4-hour marathon.
That's right.
Right. And so the nutrition and the hydration and the recovery and the intensity and the, all of this kind of stuff, you can't always model what the elites are doing and say, I'm just going to follow what they do and I'll get the same result. Your physiology is not the same. Your training history is not the same. And so that's not a good approach. But I do think a lot of the tools and tactics and techniques and technology that they're using will become accessible and could be really beneficial for lower level athletes.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. You just got me thinking of a potentially great company would be if we had a really simple mechanism rather than you mentioned 4 different watches, but just a simple Garmin that would track everything. And at the end of a workout or something, it just rather than all the different metrics, because I get metric fatigue, right? I've been in focus groups with different products that have launched, like Stride, that has the pod on your foot that measures energy output while you run and all. And after a while, I don't even want it because it's just too much data. But what if it just told you, hey, this is how you felt at this point in time, and maybe if you would have done this half an hour before, taken this gel or something, you would have avoided that. Just really simple advice that it would give you while it's measuring you along the way. I think that would be really great because I think there's too many of us who. That's why I just go back to the good old faithful heart rate. I just track heart rate for everything, whether it's resting heart rate while I'm sleeping or heart rate while I run. I know that just works well for me because it's simple, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you also have the qualitative that you probably know, if you were to look back and say, oh, my heart rate was, 165 at this point in this run, in this race, you probably know what you were experiencing at that heart rate as well. That's hard, right? Versus like, oh yeah, that, someone could judge your intensity based on your heart rate because you have such a training history.
Yeah, I could even tell when my watch is off, right? Because it just feels too easy in my heart rate. Because watches are notorious for being off at different times. Well, Michael, on that note, I'd like to switch over to our world famous Wayfinder 4. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, so give us a hack that you use. This is just a life hack you use to cheat life with every day.
I love variety, but having a routine is one of the things I think in even just one area that just becomes, I love being mindful, but having something that can just be mindless, whether it's eating the same breakfast every morning or, getting things prepared so that you don't have to look for gear or for whatever, and just making things easy when they can be easy so that you can focus on the complexity and the complication of everything else in your life.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes just having something, not having to think about something makes things is such a hack, right? And routine allows for that. Yeah. How about a favorite? This could be a book, show, activity, whatever.
I think in the theme of this conversation, I just read a book by Alex Hutchinson called Endure.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting perspective. He was a very competitive runner, finished in the top 10 in the Cherry Blossom 10 miler in DC a few years back. But he's also a journalist and had some great perspective on the research around perceived exertion and these kinds of things. I highly recommend that book for anyone who's interested in endurance sports science.
Yeah. Yeah, actually I have it on my list because I heard him on another podcast, the Marathon Training Academy, who we've had the host on the show with. But and I have it on my list of books to read. So that's good. It's very rare that a book about running comes out that I want to read anymore. I feel like I've read a lot of them, but that was one I definitely have there. How about a piece of advice for your younger self?
I just realized in the last month who I really care what they think about me. And for much of my life, I filtered my actions and my words and things by what people would think. I probably
I don't regret finishing grad school, but I thought, a few years into grad school, it was a tough time. And I thought, what will my college classmates or my, high school friends think if I quit? And that thought of them being disappointed in me or something kept me going. And I think at the end of the day, I'm glad that I finished, but I didn't really care what they thought. And
Yeah.
I started that I was reflecting just in the last month. I thought I cared what people thought about what I post on social media. And then I realized there's only four people in my life who I care what they think. And it's my partner, Heather, my son, and my father and my brother. And as much as I love you, Louis, I don't put you on that list of people I care
Huh.
really. Like, it's not going to stop me from saying something that I really care about, and that's really what I mean is when I think of something that I am really passionate about, or I want to say, who do I think is going to judge me for that? And I think you and I have a relationship that you provide really great advice and insight and perspective, but you don't judge me for what I do or what I say. But at the end of the day, I just don't really care who does, except for these four people. And so I think I wish I'd internalized that 25 years ago. And I would just hope other people kind of, if they hear this, reflect on that and just think really introspectively, who in their life do they really care? Because at the end of the day, like 50, hopefully longer, maybe 60 years from now, neither of us will be around. And will anyone remember anything we said or did? Not if we are filtering everything by wanting to please people or fly under the radar or whatever. So
Yeah. No,
I'm not
that's
advocating being unhinged and just saying whatever you whatever you feel, but I think we overthink and sometimes filter too much what we think and what we say, and being, especially men, right? Being a little more open about our feelings particularly could sometimes be a good thing.
yeah. No, that's good. I think Dr. Seuss said it best when he said that, stop caring what others think because those who matter don't care and those who care don't matter. So, how about a big opportunity or a limiting belief? Just choose one and how that speak to that one of those, however you see fit.
You mentioned AI with the data, and I think the big opportunity for me right now in my business is to use all of the tools and resources to scale so that I can stay in my zone of genius as much as possible. And I realize that's networking and public speaking and coaching and thought leadership and these kinds of things, and not marketing and promotion and sales. So whether it's AI or automations or systems or virtual assistants or staff, I have a goal of helping 100,000 athletes race stronger, faster races in the next decade. And that's not going to be possible doing one-on-one coaching, or if I'm spending my time doing things that are draining for me, energetically. I need to show up in the way that I did, with the energy I did in this conversation on every conversation I'm a part of. And when I show up to give a presentation or a workshop or a seminar or whatever, when you are the brand that you represented and you created, people look to you. It may be their first time ever seeing me or interacting with me or being in the audience, and they deserve the best of me. And so I need to really focus on that, the things that only I can do, and delegate or delete or automate all the things that are not within that sliver.
Yeah.
So
That's a big goal, man. So with that, why don't you share how people can find you so we can help you reach that goal?
my website is michaeldonovancoaching.com, and that's just a great place to find out all the things that I'm doing, and kind of a hub for everything. My podcast is on all of the platforms. That's Performance Lab Fact Fueled Fitness, and you can find me on Instagram. It's Dr. Michael Donovan. Facebook, same thing. And then I have the Fact Fueled Fitness brand coming out soon, which is using metrics, using testing, and the thought leadership that I'm going to be talking about next next month in these workshops and the presentations and seminars, and looking to do a lot more public speaking and talking to corporations and teams and things like that. So
All right.
Michael Donovan Coaching is the best hub for all things.
And people will always be able to find that at michaeldonovancoaching.com, right?
That's right. That's
All
right.
right. Well, Michael, thank you for your friendship, for being here on the show, sharing some knowledge. I hope people go check you out. And, I know that you're the real deal. Hopefully people got a little bit of that from here, but if not, just follow. I urge everybody to follow you, and they'll see if they want to get better. They want to get fitter, faster. They should be following you and, seeking your help. Thanks.
Thank you, Louis. Appreciate it.
All right.
You've been listening to Performance Lab. I'm Dr. Michael Donovan, reminding you that peak performance is a journey, not a destination. For more cutting edge insights and actionable tips, subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media. Until next time, keep pushing your limits and stay tuned to the Performance Lab.